What if one of Scotland's most peaceful bridges has been hiding the first clues to its mystery in plain sight all along? Long before scientists, journalists, or paranormal investigators arrived, ordinary dog owners began describing moments so strangely alike that coincidence became increasingly difficult to accept. The bridge never changed. The landscape never changed. Yet story after story pointed toward the same quiet crossing, raising a question that still refuses to disappear. Was everyone witnessing the same unexplained event, or were they overlooking something hidden within the bridge itself? If you are watching this right now, I want to ask you something. How much of history do you think is actually true? Because what you are about to hear was never meant to reach you. These are the classified files, the buried evidence, and the forbidden stories that powerful forces spent decades trying to erase. If you are someone who refuses to accept the official story, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the Dark History Files and join thousands of truth seekers uncovering what history tried to hide. Welcome back. This is the Dark History Files, and today we expose a truth that was never meant to be told. Far above a narrow Scottish ravine, the Overtoun Bridge stretches across open air with quiet confidence. Its pale stone arches rise from the hillside as though they have always belonged there. Thick woodland surrounds the crossing, softening its edges behind layers of oak, beech, and evergreen trees. From a distance, the bridge appears almost modest, neither grand nor forgotten. It stands between rolling ground and deep water, shaped by careful hands during another century, long before anyone imagined its name would become linked with an unsettling mystery. The first moments on the bridge are filled with sounds that seem ordinary until they begin to gather together. Wind brushes through heavy branches with a low whisper. Water moves somewhere beneath the stone, hidden by leaves and steep rock. Damp earth carries the scent of moss, bark, and old rainfall, while cool air drifts across the open path without warning. Every step feels connected to the landscape instead of separate from it. The surroundings invite attention through quiet details rather than dramatic displays, encouraging visitors to notice what usually escapes a passing glance. For many years, the bridge served its simple purpose without attracting unusual attention. Walkers crossed from one side of the estate to the other, pausing only to admire the valley below or the changing colors of the Scottish seasons. The stone gradually weathered beneath rain, frost, and gentle sunlight, while generations passed over its surface. Then, almost unnoticed at first, scattered stories began to appear. A few conversations carried unexpected questions. Local memories slowly gathered around brief encounters that seemed difficult to explain, giving the bridge a reputation that had never existed before. Looking upon the bridge today brings an unusual feeling that is difficult to separate from everything later associated with it. Knowledge quietly changes perception before a single step is taken. An ordinary crossing becomes a place where curiosity follows every shadow and every distant sound. The landscape itself offers no obvious warning, yet the mind searches for hidden meaning among familiar shapes. Before any evidence is examined or any explanation considered, the bridge asks a silent question that has echoed across decades. Why did this quiet place become known throughout the world for something so deeply unsettling? The bridge was completed in the late 19th century, during a period when Scotland was changing beneath the influence of industry, expanding cities, and ambitious country estates. Overtoun House stood nearby as a symbol of wealth and confidence, overlooking land carefully shaped for beauty as much as function. Visitors approached along winding roads before reaching the stone crossing, where skilled masonry blended naturally with the surrounding hills. Nothing about its construction hinted at future mystery. It was designed to carry people safely across the deep burn below, linking one part of the estate with another in quiet practicality. From above, the bridge presents a calm and balanced appearance. The pathway feels broad enough for an easy walk, bordered by high stone parapets that rise above waist height for most adults. Looking outward, the walls reveal little of what lies beneath. Beyond the edge, the land suddenly falls away into a steep wooded gorge where rocks, flowing water, and dense vegetation remain largely hidden from anyone standing on the crossing itself. This contrast between the open path and the concealed landscape below would later become one of the bridge's most important physical features. The ravine itself has existed far longer than the bridge. Water patiently carved its course through layers of ancient stone, creating sharp slopes where trees reached toward the light from impossible angles. Ferns covered damp ground, moss spread across fallen trunks, and tangled roots gripped the earth after countless seasons of rain. Mist often gathered inside the hollow during cool mornings, rising slowly before disappearing into the forest canopy. Light entered unevenly, leaving some places bright for only a short part of the day, while neighboring rocks remained shaded for hours. Scottish weather added another layer to the character of the place. Bright sunshine could give way to drifting cloud within minutes, changing colors across the valley almost without notice. A gentle breeze sometimes carried the scent of wet leaves from the gorge, while stronger winds swept across the bridge before fading into the woodland beyond. Rain polished the stone until it reflected soft patches of light, then left behind dark marks that slowly dried under clearer skies. Each passing condition altered the atmosphere, making the familiar landscape appear quietly different from one visit to the next. For decades, travelers remembered Overtoun Bridge for its craftsmanship rather than for any strange reputation. Families crossed it on ordinary walks. Estate workers followed familiar routes without recording unusual events. Guests admired the surrounding scenery before continuing their journeys toward the house or into the nearby countryside. If conversations about the bridge took place at all, they centered on its elegant design and peaceful setting. History had not yet attached darker meanings to its name. The crossing remained an almost invisible part of the landscape, waiting through the passing years before its silence would eventually be interrupted. Long before the bridge became associated with unexplained events, the land surrounding it already carried a history that stretched back through generations. The estate changed hands over time, reflecting the fortunes of Scottish families whose lives were closely tied to the countryside. Paths were cleared through woodland, gardens were shaped with deliberate care, and the impressive house overlooking the valley became a center of quiet activity. The bridge formed only one piece of a much larger landscape, connecting people, property, and routine in ways that seemed entirely ordinary. Those who approached the crossing rarely arrived by accident. The journey itself unfolded gradually through narrow roads bordered by trees and open fields. As the estate came into view, the surroundings encouraged a slower pace. Tall branches filtered the daylight into shifting patterns across the ground, while distant birds called from hidden perches within the forest. The bridge appeared only after the final bend, emerging naturally from the landscape instead of dominating it. Its presence felt discovered rather than announced. Architecturally, Overtoun Bridge reflected the confidence of Victorian engineering without sacrificing elegance. The carefully cut stone blocks fitted together with remarkable precision, allowing the structure to withstand harsh winters, heavy rainfall, and the steady passage of time. The arches beneath distributed weight with quiet efficiency, while the parapet walls gave walkers a reassuring sense of enclosure. Every detail suggested permanence. The builders created something intended to last for generations, never imagining that future visitors would study those same stones for reasons entirely unrelated to architecture. Nature, however, continued shaping the place long after construction ended. Ivy reached across sections of old masonry. Soft patches of moss settled into tiny cracks, and seasonal leaves gathered along the edges before being carried away by wind or rain. Spring filled the surrounding woodland with fresh color, while autumn covered the paths in deep shades of gold and brown. Each season offered a different version of the bridge, allowing the landscape to renew itself without altering the structure standing at its center. Because of this balance between human design and natural growth, the bridge possessed an unusual character. It felt built by people, yet slowly reclaimed by the environment around it. Visitors could admire skilled craftsmanship while sensing the quiet influence of the forest pressing gently against every stone. That subtle relationship created an atmosphere difficult to define. The crossing belonged to civilization, but it never seemed completely separate from the wild valley beneath it. Long before mystery entered the story, the setting itself invited careful observation, rewarding those who looked beyond the obvious surface. As the years passed, Overtoun Bridge became woven into the quiet rhythm of everyday life. Estate staff crossed it while tending the surrounding grounds. Visitors arrived to admire the house and the woodland beyond. Local families included the route in peaceful afternoon walks, rarely giving the bridge more attention than any other crossing along the Scottish countryside. It existed as a familiar landmark rather than a destination, serving practical needs without inviting unusual conversation. The bridge belonged to ordinary routines, and its greatest quality seemed to be how naturally it blended into the landscape around it. The surrounding forest encouraged people to slow their pace without asking them to stop completely. Sunlight filtered through layered branches, creating moving patterns across the stone path as clouds drifted overhead. Birds shifted between high limbs, their calls echoing softly through the valley before fading into the distance. After rainfall, tiny streams appeared along the edges of the hillside, feeding the burn hidden beneath the arches. At other times the air carried only the faint rustle of leaves, giving each walk a slightly different character even when the route remained unchanged. Those who paused near the center of the bridge often found themselves looking beyond its stone walls toward the wider estate. The woodland stretched outward in gentle waves, while distant fields opened beneath the changing Scottish sky. The ravine itself remained surprisingly concealed. High parapets prevented an easy view of the steep drop below, allowing the crossing to feel secure despite the dramatic landscape hidden only a short distance away. This separation between appearance and reality was subtle. A person standing on the bridge experienced calm openness, while the deep gorge beneath remained almost entirely outside immediate awareness. Victorian designers often believed that architecture should exist in harmony with its surroundings rather than compete against them. Overtoun Bridge reflected that philosophy with remarkable restraint. Its pale stone echoed the natural colors of nearby rock, while graceful arches followed the contours of the valley instead of interrupting them. Even after decades of exposure to wind and rain, the structure retained an understated elegance. It never demanded admiration through size or decoration. Instead, it earned attention through proportion, craftsmanship, and the quiet confidence of careful construction. Looking back from the present, it becomes difficult to imagine a time when the bridge carried no sense of mystery at all. Yet for much of its existence, that was exactly the case. People crossed it without hesitation, shared conversations as they walked, and continued their journeys without leaving behind remarkable stories. The landscape inspired appreciation rather than concern. Nothing in the stone suggested an approaching legend. Nothing in the forest hinted that future generations would travel from distant countries, not to admire Victorian engineering, but to stand upon the same quiet crossing and wonder how an ordinary bridge could one day become the center of one of Scotland's most enduring and unsettling mysteries. Every place carries two histories. One belongs to the stones, the trees, and the passing years that quietly shape the landscape. The other is created by memory, growing through stories that people choose to repeat. Overtoun Bridge spent much of its existence living only within the first history. It was a carefully built crossing above a wooded ravine, admired for its setting and trusted for its purpose. Nothing about its appearance separated it from countless other Victorian bridges scattered across Britain. Yet history has a curious habit of changing the meaning of familiar places without changing their physical form. That transformation did not happen in a single moment. There was no dramatic event that instantly altered the bridge's reputation across Scotland. Instead, the change arrived gradually through scattered accounts that seemed too unusual to ignore completely, yet too isolated to form an obvious pattern. Individual stories traveled from neighbor to neighbor, then beyond the local community. Each account carried quiet uncertainty rather than confident explanation. The bridge itself offered no answers. It continued standing above the ravine exactly as before, while questions slowly gathered around it from people searching for connections that remained difficult to see. As those conversations spread, the landscape began to feel different even though nothing visible had truly changed. Visitors arrived carrying knowledge that earlier generations never possessed. A simple walk across the stone path became colored by expectation. Ordinary sounds encouraged closer attention. Shadows beneath the trees seemed to hold greater significance. The mind naturally searched for clues hidden within familiar surroundings, discovering possibilities where previous travelers had noticed only woodland, weather, and stone. Reputation had begun reshaping perception long before any careful investigation attempted to understand what was actually happening. This is where the story truly begins. Before theories, before headlines, and before the bridge became known across the world, there was only an ordinary place standing quietly within the Scottish countryside. It waited through changing seasons, unaware that countless strangers would one day arrive carrying the same unanswered question. The crossing itself never spoke. The valley offered no explanation. Together, they became the silent stage upon which one of the most unusual mysteries involving animals would slowly unfold, leaving behind a trail of curiosity that has endured for generations and continues to invite careful attention today. The first incidents gave the bridge its unsettling reputation. But before searching for answers, we need to understand something even more important: the place where every one of those events unfolded. Because the landscape itself may be revealing clues that most visitors never notice. At first, there was no legend attached to Overtoun Bridge. The earliest reports described ordinary walks interrupted by an event that nobody expected. A dog would approach the middle section of the crossing, move toward one side, and suddenly disappear beyond the stone wall. Owners searched below in disbelief, struggling to understand what they had just witnessed. The bridge itself looked no different from the countless times they had crossed it before, offering no visible clue that anything unusual had happened. Those first accounts carried a quiet sense of confusion rather than fear. The sounds of distant water, the cool breath of the woodland, and the familiar rhythm of footsteps all suggested another peaceful outing. Then the silence broke with hurried voices calling into the ravine below. The fresh scent of damp leaves mixed with rising panic as owners leaned over the parapet, trying to locate their companions among rocks, branches, and patches of dense vegetation hidden beneath the bridge. As months became years, isolated stories slowly found one another. Local conversations began connecting separate incidents that had once seemed unrelated. A neighbor mentioned an unusual experience. Someone remembered hearing a similar account from another family. Visitors arriving from nearby towns carried their own unexpected stories, adding fresh pieces to a puzzle that nobody had intended to assemble. Gradually, what had appeared to be rare accidents started forming a pattern that invited careful attention instead of easy dismissal. For those living near the bridge, the greatest uncertainty came from the absence of a clear explanation. The reports shared surprising similarities, yet certainty always remained beyond reach. Each new account encouraged fresh questions while leaving older ones unanswered. People found themselves thinking differently about a place they had trusted for generations. Curiosity settled beside concern, creating an uneasy feeling that the bridge might be holding something hidden, not because it revealed a secret, but because every attempt to understand it seemed to uncover another mystery waiting beneath the surface. The earliest documented incidents never arrived as a single dramatic event. They appeared quietly, separated by months or even years, making them easy to overlook at first. A local resident might mention losing a dog during what had begun as an ordinary walk. Another family shared a remarkably similar experience sometime later. Each account seemed isolated, carrying too little evidence to suggest anything unusual beyond tragic chance. Only with the passing of time did people begin to notice that these stories were unfolding at the very same location on the bridge. Many owners described nearly identical moments before the fall. Their dogs were not frightened or behaving unpredictably as they approached the crossing. Most appeared relaxed, walking comfortably beside their owners while exploring the surroundings in the familiar way that healthy dogs often do. Then, within only a few seconds, something seemed to capture their attention. The animals changed direction with unexpected determination, moved toward the parapet, and disappeared over the side before anyone nearby could react. The suddenness of these actions became one of the most unsettling features repeated throughout the early reports. An even stranger detail slowly emerged from conversations among witnesses. The incidents were frequently described as taking place near the same section of the bridge rather than being spread evenly across its length. Owners who had never met one another unknowingly pointed to almost identical locations. Some remembered their dogs pulling toward the right-hand side when traveling in one direction. Others recalled the same narrow stretch where the unexpected movement began. While memories naturally differed, the repeated references to one particular area encouraged people to look beyond coincidence and consider whether the bridge itself might somehow be influencing events. The local response developed cautiously rather than dramatically. Few people immediately accepted extraordinary explanations. Most searched for ordinary answers first, wondering whether weather, loose footing, distractions, or hidden wildlife could account for what had happened. Conversations remained careful, shaped more by uncertainty than conviction. Those who had experienced the tragedy rarely claimed to understand it themselves. Instead, they described moments that resisted simple explanation, leaving listeners with unanswered questions instead of satisfying conclusions. As these reports accumulated, the bridge quietly gained a reputation unlike any other nearby landmark. Visitors who had never heard the stories crossed without concern, while local residents increasingly approached the place with thoughtful hesitation. The mystery was not built upon dramatic claims or sensational rumors in its earliest years. It grew because ordinary people, speaking independently across different periods of time, continued describing events that sounded remarkably alike. Each new account added another thread to a growing narrative, one that slowly transformed an elegant Victorian bridge into a place surrounded by enduring uncertainty. As local awareness slowly increased, people began looking more carefully at the circumstances surrounding each report. Small details that once seemed unimportant were remembered with greater attention. Owners recalled the direction they had been walking, the weather that afternoon, or the way their dogs had behaved only moments before the incident. These memories did not produce immediate answers, yet they gradually revealed similarities that had escaped notice when each event was considered on its own. One observation appeared often enough to attract particular interest. Many of the dogs involved were described as healthy, energetic, and naturally curious. They were not elderly animals struggling with poor balance, nor were they behaving as though frightened by something behind them. Witnesses frequently remembered their dogs moving forward with confidence, almost as if they had detected something worthy of investigation. That unexpected sense of purpose made the incidents feel especially difficult to explain. The animals did not appear confused. Instead, they seemed intensely focused on something beyond ordinary human awareness. Another recurring feature was the speed with which everything unfolded. Owners often had only a brief moment to react before the situation changed completely. A dog might pause for an instant, lift its head as though catching an unfamiliar scent, then move with surprising commitment toward the parapet. There was rarely enough time to tighten a lead or call the animal back before it disappeared from view. The suddenness left many witnesses replaying the moment repeatedly, searching their memories for a warning sign they might have missed. These shared experiences encouraged careful discussion among veterinarians, local residents, and visitors who heard the growing stories. Some believed the similarities pointed toward an environmental explanation hidden somewhere around the bridge. Others urged caution, reminding people that memory can naturally become influenced after unexpected events. Both views carried reasonable questions, and neither could fully account for every report. The mystery remained balanced between observation and uncertainty, refusing to settle comfortably into a single explanation. By the middle of the 20th century, the bridge was no longer known only for its graceful stonework or its peaceful setting. It had quietly acquired another identity, shaped by conversations rather than official records alone. People arrived carrying stories they had heard from friends, newspapers, or relatives. Each visitor viewed the bridge through a slightly different lens, yet many left with the same lingering impression. Something unusual had happened here often enough to deserve attention, even if nobody could yet explain exactly why those early incidents shared so many unsettling similarities. As word spread beyond the surrounding villages, newspaper reporters and curious visitors began asking whether the bridge was witnessing an extraordinary series of unrelated accidents or something far more unusual. Early articles often relied on interviews with local residents rather than official investigations. They collected personal recollections, compared similar accounts, and presented the mystery with cautious language. Even then, many reports avoided dramatic conclusions. The facts themselves appeared strange enough, leaving readers with questions instead of certainty. Owners who returned to describe their experiences often emphasized one particular detail. Their dogs had shown no hesitation before moving toward the edge. There was no prolonged period of nervous behavior, no obvious struggle, and no visible attempt to retreat. The movement appeared direct and purposeful, almost as though the animal had become completely absorbed by something hidden beyond the stone parapet. This repeated description challenged ordinary expectations, because healthy dogs generally avoid sudden leaps from unfamiliar heights unless strongly motivated by something they perceive. The bridge gradually became a place where every new incident was compared with those that came before it. Local people started recognizing familiar patterns even before details had fully emerged. They asked similar questions each time. Which part of the bridge was involved? Was the dog on a lead? What was the weather like? Did anyone notice unusual behavior beforehand? These conversations reflected a growing effort to understand rather than sensationalize the events. Each answer contributed another small fragment, yet the larger picture continued to resist clear interpretation. Some incidents carried an especially tragic element. Dogs that survived the initial fall occasionally attempted to return toward the same area if brought back nearby during rescue efforts. Although such accounts were fewer in number and remained debated, they added another layer of uncertainty to an already puzzling story. Whether these reports reflected instinct, confusion after injury, or imperfect human memory became another subject of discussion. Instead of resolving the mystery, they expanded it, encouraging even greater caution whenever new claims emerged. By this stage, the bridge had entered local folklore through lived experience rather than ancient legend. Its reputation grew because independent stories continued appearing across different years, shared by people with little connection to one another. The pattern was compelling enough to invite serious attention, yet incomplete enough to prevent confident conclusions. Standing on the bridge, a visitor could see nothing that explained those accounts. The landscape remained beautiful, the stonework appeared dependable, and the crossing felt entirely ordinary. It was precisely that contrast between appearance and experience that made the earliest incidents so enduringly difficult to forget. Looking back across the earliest reports, what stands out is not the number of incidents alone, but the way they slowly reshaped the identity of an ordinary place. Each account arrived carrying its own uncertainty, told by different people at different times. Yet many shared details that felt unexpectedly familiar. The bridge itself offered no obvious explanation. It remained the same elegant Victorian crossing that generations had trusted, while its reputation quietly evolved through stories that resisted simple answers. As more people learned about the incidents, caution gradually became part of every visit. Local residents began advising newcomers to keep dogs close while crossing. Some owners shortened their leads before reaching the bridge, not because they fully accepted every story they had heard, but because the growing pattern seemed difficult to ignore. Practical habits developed naturally, shaped less by fear than by the possibility that something unusual might be waiting in a place where nothing appeared out of the ordinary. At the same time, the mystery became more complicated rather than less. Every fresh incident encouraged new theories, yet each explanation seemed unable to account for every known detail. If the events were nothing more than coincidence, why did so many accounts resemble one another? If there was a hidden environmental cause, why did it affect some dogs while leaving countless others completely unharmed? These questions lingered between observation and speculation, inviting careful thought instead of quick conclusions. The first unsettling incidents therefore marked more than the beginning of an unusual story. They transformed the way people looked at Overtoun Bridge itself. A structure once appreciated for its craftsmanship and peaceful surroundings became associated with quiet uncertainty. From this point onward, every visitor arrived carrying at least a fragment of the mystery. Some expected an ordinary walk through the Scottish countryside. Others searched the landscape for answers hidden beyond the stone walls. The bridge welcomed both with the same silent presence. Yet beneath that calm appearance, an unanswered question had taken root, one that would eventually draw scientists, journalists, animal behavior experts, and believers in the supernatural toward the same isolated crossing, each hoping to uncover the reason behind a mystery that refused to fade. Now that the bridge and its hidden geography have come into focus, another question naturally follows. If the environment shapes what humans can see, what might it be communicating to an animal with senses far beyond our own? That possibility leads us into the next stage of the investigation. From above, Overtoun Bridge presents a balanced and reassuring shape. Wide stone parapets line both sides of the crossing, giving little indication of the steep gorge concealed beyond them. The arches beneath span a deep ravine carved by water over countless years, while thick woodland rises along its slopes. Trees crowd close to the bridge, softening the edges of the landscape until the boundary between solid ground and sudden emptiness becomes surprisingly difficult to judge from the pathway itself. Crossing the bridge offers an experience that changes with every few steps. The scent of damp moss rises from the hidden valley below, blending with wet leaves, bark, and cool Scottish air. Wind carries faint sounds upward from the burn flowing beneath the arches, yet the source often remains invisible behind stone and foliage. Light slips through gaps in the canopy, creating bright patches that briefly reveal the woodland before shadows gather again across the surrounding ground. The landscape begins to reveal its unusual design only through careful observation. A person walking along the bridge naturally follows the level path ahead, while the steep descent remains concealed behind the high parapets. Dense vegetation fills much of the ravine, masking exposed rock and the true depth below. What appears to be a continuous stretch of woodland from above is, in reality, a sharp drop interrupted by branches, uneven slopes, and scattered stone. The eye receives a calm impression, even where the terrain becomes unexpectedly dangerous. This contrast quietly changes the way the bridge is understood. It is not only a structure connecting two sides of a valley, it also shapes perception by hiding as much as it reveals. The safest looking route passes directly above one of the most dramatic features of the surrounding landscape. That subtle difference between appearance and reality invites a deeper question. Before considering mystery, folklore, or science, it becomes necessary to understand how the geography itself may encourage both humans and animals to trust a place that keeps part of its true nature carefully out of sight. The most striking feature of Overtoun Bridge is not immediately visible from the path itself. Its parapet walls, built for safety and architectural balance, stand high enough to conceal much of the ravine beneath. A person walking across the bridge sees trees stretching outward rather than empty space directly below. The eye naturally follows the level horizon ahead, while the dramatic change in elevation remains hidden behind carefully placed stone. This simple design creates a landscape that feels far more open and secure than it truly is. Beyond those walls, the ground falls away with surprising speed. The drop measures roughly 50 feet in places, leading into a narrow gorge where exposed rocks, flowing water, and thick vegetation occupy the valley floor. Branches extend upward from mature trees, partially filling the empty space between the bridge and the burn below. From above, those branches soften the appearance of the ravine, making the descent seem less severe than it actually is. The result is a visual illusion created not by trickery, but by the natural arrangement of stone, woodland, and changing light. The shape of the valley adds another layer to this unusual geography. The ravine narrows beneath the bridge before widening farther downstream, allowing scents, sounds, and moving air to travel in distinctive ways. Wind passing through the gorge can carry the smell of damp earth, moss, woodland animals, and flowing water upward toward the crossing. At the same time, echoes from below lose their direction as they reflect from rock faces and heavy vegetation. Someone standing above may hear faint movement without immediately identifying where it began or how far away it really is. Seasonal growth continually reshapes the appearance of the landscape. During spring and summer, fresh leaves create a dense canopy that hides much of the valley beneath. Autumn opens small windows through the branches as leaves begin to fall, revealing glimpses of rock that remain invisible for much of the year. Winter strips away even more cover, exposing parts of the gorge while leaving others protected by evergreen trees. Each season changes what the bridge reveals and conceals, giving regular visitors a landscape that never presents exactly the same view twice. These physical features are important because they influence perception before anyone begins searching for extraordinary explanations. A bridge that appears straightforward from above can conceal complex terrain beneath its surface. Height, vegetation, airflow, and limited visibility combine to create conditions that are far more complicated than a casual glance suggests. Long before investigators debated animal behavior or local folklore, the geography itself offered quiet clues that the environment around Overtoun Bridge deserved closer attention than its peaceful appearance first encouraged. One of the most deceptive qualities of Overtoun Bridge lies in the way it guides attention. Human eyes naturally focus on the path ahead, following the direction of travel instead of studying what lies beyond the parapet. The bridge encourages forward movement through its balanced proportions and gentle alignment with the surrounding estate. Because the crossing feels comfortable and familiar, few visitors pause to consider how little of the landscape beneath them is actually visible from their position. Perspective changes everything. Standing near the center of the bridge offers a very different experience from looking upward at it from the valley floor. Below, the full height of the stone arches becomes immediately apparent, rising above the gorge with impressive scale. From above, however, much of that dramatic elevation disappears behind the parapets and nearby trees. The same structure presents two completely different impressions depending upon where the observer stands. This contrast between viewpoints helps explain why the hidden depth of the ravine can remain surprisingly difficult to appreciate until it is seen from below. The vegetation surrounding the bridge also shapes movement through the landscape. Mature trees crowd close to the stonework, while thick shrubs and undergrowth spread across the slopes beneath. Branches extend toward open spaces where sunlight reaches the forest, creating layers that overlap one another from almost every angle. Instead of revealing clear boundaries between safe ground and steep descent, the woodland blends those edges together. The eye follows leaves, trunks, and patches of green rather than the uneven terrain concealed beneath them, allowing the natural environment to soften features that would otherwise appear far more dramatic. Water has played an equally important role in creating this setting. Over thousands of years, the burn beneath the bridge gradually carved deeper into the surrounding rock, leaving behind steep walls shaped by continuous erosion. Rainfall carried loose soil downward, encouraging new plants to take root along the slopes while exposing stone in other places. Every season added another small change to the valley, producing a landscape that reflected countless years of natural processes. The bridge arrived much later, spanning a gorge that had already been patiently formed by water long before Victorian builders laid the first blocks of stone. Understanding this geography requires looking beyond the bridge itself. The mystery surrounding Overtoun has often drawn attention toward dramatic theories, yet the landscape quietly contributes its own influence through shape, elevation, vegetation, and perspective. None of these features offers a complete explanation on its own. Together, however, They reveal an environment where appearances can easily differ from reality. Before considering what may have happened to the dogs that crossed here, it is worth recognizing that the land itself keeps many of its most important details hidden until someone chooses to look from a different angle. The bridge was engineered to solve a practical problem rather than create a dramatic viewpoint. Victorian builders wanted a dependable crossing that blended with the surrounding estate while carrying people safely above the ravine. High parapets offered protection for walkers and horse-drawn traffic, yet those same walls also restricted the view of the valley below. Their purpose was entirely sensible, but they unintentionally created a crossing where the true shape of the landscape remained partially hidden until someone looked over the edge or descended into the gorge itself. The ground surrounding the bridge adds another subtle complication. The approach from either side feels smooth and inviting, encouraging an easy walking pace through woodland that appears continuous across the valley. There is little visual warning that the terrain changes so dramatically only a few feet beyond the parapets. Grass, shrubs, and mature trees create a natural flow that guides attention across the bridge instead of downward. As a result, the crossing feels closely connected to the forest around it, even though a significant drop separates the two levels. Air also behaves differently within the narrow gorge than it does across the open path. Cool currents rise from below as warmer air moves through the trees above, carrying scents and moisture along shifting routes that change throughout the day. Gentle breezes may drift upward from unexpected directions before fading almost immediately. These invisible movements shape the environment in quiet ways, transporting woodland smells from the valley floor toward the bridge while leaving no obvious sign of where they originated. What seems calm at the surface often hides a far more active exchange taking place within the landscape beneath. Light contributes another layer of quiet deception. During certain hours, sunlight reaches the upper branches while the gorge remains wrapped in shadow. At other times, reflections from wet stone brighten isolated parts of the valley before disappearing behind passing cloud. These changing conditions influence depth, contrast, and visibility, making distances appear shorter or longer depending upon the season and the weather. A familiar route can therefore feel subtly different from one visit to the next, even when every physical feature remains in its expected place. Taken together, these characteristics reveal that Overtoun Bridge occupies an unusually complex setting. Architecture, elevation, vegetation, airflow, and light combine to shape an environment that cannot be understood from a single glance. The crossing appears straightforward because it successfully conceals many of the landscape's most dramatic features. That quiet concealment becomes an important foundation for everything that follows. Before questions of instinct, behavior, or folklore enter the story, the geography itself demonstrates that appearances can gently guide perception while leaving crucial details just beyond immediate awareness. By the end of this closer examination, the bridge begins to feel less like a simple crossing and more like a meeting point between carefully built architecture and an unexpectedly complex landscape. Every physical feature contributes something subtle to the experience. The height conceals its full impact until viewed from below. The parapets encourage attention toward the path ahead. Trees soften the outline of the ravine, while shifting light and moving air quietly reshape what the senses notice from one moment to the next. None of these elements is extraordinary on its own. Similar stone bridges stand throughout Britain, and deep wooded valleys are woven into the Scottish countryside. Yet Overtoun gathers these familiar features into a remarkably concentrated setting. The geography creates a place where distance can be difficult to judge, where the valley floor remains largely hidden, and where the environment reveals itself only in small fragments. A casual visitor may remember a peaceful woodland walk, while a careful observer begins noticing how much of the landscape remains concealed behind apparently ordinary surroundings. This understanding becomes especially important because it separates the visible mystery from the physical reality beneath it. The bridge has often been described through stories of unexplained events, but long before those stories spread, the land already possessed qualities capable of influencing perception. Steep elevation, concealed terrain, drifting scents, changing weather, and layered vegetation all belonged to the site before the first unusual account was ever recorded. They formed the quiet stage upon which later events would unfold, waiting unnoticed beneath the attention of passing generations. The landscape, therefore, deserves to be understood before any search for answers begins. It reminds us that places often shape experience in ways that remain invisible until someone pauses to look more carefully. Overtoun Bridge is not defined only by the stone resting above the ravine. It is equally defined by the hidden space beneath, the woodland surrounding it, and the natural forces moving quietly through the valley every hour of every day. Only after understanding this physical setting can the next question be approached with greater clarity. If the geography creates the stage, then perhaps the senses of the animals crossing it hold the next piece of the mystery. The bridge has revealed its history, its earliest mysteries, and the landscape that quietly surrounds them. But the most important questions are only beginning to emerge. In 48 hours, we'll continue the journey by exploring the competing explanations, the scientific investigations, and the theories that have kept this remarkable mystery alive for generations.